Today I'm talking about one of my favorite things in the whole world, and that is the revocable living trust. And more specifically, what does it cost to establish a revocable living trust as opposed to a last will and testament? I have to answer that question sort of in two ways, because there's the cost of things to create the revocable trust versus creating a will, and then there's the cost to your family after you pass away of the trust versus the will. And the answers might surprise you because the answers for those two different questions are different. So let's start by talking about the difference to establish a trust versus establish a will. You know I like to pack my videos with real, true answers. So let's talk about the cost to establish a will here in the Dallas area. Now, if we're talking about a single person, I would say the typical cost here in 2023 to establish a last will and testament with a lawyer is going to range anywhere from about $400 or $500 on the low end up to $1,000 to maybe $1,200 sort of on the high end. Now, there can be some cost reductions if a married couple goes in together and has the will prepared at the same time. So if you're talking about a married couple, I would say those averages are anywhere from maybe $700 or $800 on the low end to $1,500, maybe $2,000 on the high end as an average last will and testament prepared by an attorney for a married couple. Let's contrast that to what does it cost to establish a revocable living trust with a typical attorney here in the Dallas area. Well, here you're going to see a much wider range because there's a much wider range in the trusts themselves. So a will is very sort of formulaic. It kind of says what it needs to say, and there's not a lot of variability. Whereas with a trust, every revocable trust document is very, very different. And when you have something that's much more custom, it's going to just cost more because it's going to take more of that lawyer's time to draft. Now, let's contrast that to what are the increased costs of a will as opposed to a trust when you pass away. Because the difference here kind of flips on its head, whereas it actually costs more to die with a will than with a trust. So again, I like to give real clear answers. This isn't a bunch of fluff. Here in 2023, we're talking about doing a will probate. Trusts don't go through probate, so you don't have any court filing fees or anything like that if you have a trust. So the trust will have the edge cost-wise when you pass away. That being said, to establish a revocable living trust for a single person with a lawyer here in the Dallas area, you're typically looking at a minimum of about $1,500. And that cost can basically double depending on what lawyer you use. So it could be $3,000 or even more to establish a revocable living trust for a single person with the kind of related documents that go along with that revocable living trust. Now again, there can be some rate reductions if a married couple is going in at the same time to create that trust. But keep in mind, when you have a revocable living trust, it's typically just one trust agreement for both of the spouses. So unlike the wills where each spouse has his or her own, with the revocable living trust, you have one agreement for both. But still, having said that, to establish a trust for a married couple, you're typically looking at anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000 on the low end, all the way up to $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, or even more $1,000 on the higher end by the time you factor in all the related documents. So when you look at attorney's fees, when you have a wills-based plan, you're going to look at anywhere from $1,500 for a very, maybe an inexperienced probate lawyer, all the way up to $5,000 or even $10,000 to do a will probate here in the Dallas, Texas area in 2023. So the cost variables on that can really depend on whether you had a good will or if you had some sort of DIY or online job. It can also depend on which court you're put into and whether or not there are complex assets or really simple assets. But again, I would say the average there is somewhere around $3,000 to $4,000 to do sort of a plain Jane will probate. And that would be per person. And that's an important, very important distinction, because when you die with a last will and testament, and we're talking about a married couple, it is not the case that when the first spouse dies, everything automatically goes to the surviving spouse. So said another way, when we're talking about a married couple, it's not one probate, it's two will probates. So two wills would have to go through court. And more specifically, if you said the average cost is $3,500 to do a will probate, that's times two for a married couple. So, and again, with a trust, there's no cost at all because there's no court, there's no probate attorney, there's none of that. With a trust, everything just goes automatically when you pass away, so you don't have really any legal fees or very, very little legal fees at the time of that person's passing if they had a trust. So to put a finer point on it, you're looking at $3,500 minimum for sort of a normal will probate for a single person, or about $7,000 for a married couple. With the trust, it's virtually nothing after you pass away. So to answer the question just really clearly about whether it is less expensive to have a will versus a trust, well, the answer is the lawyer's answer. You've heard the lawyer's answer to everything. Well, it depends. The answer about which is more cost effective is it depends. I think most estate planning attorneys will tell you that overall, in the grand scheme of things, it actually costs less to have a trust, but the timing of that expense is different because you have a little bit more upfront costs when you have a trust and virtually no cost when you pass away. Whereas if you have a wills-based plan, it costs less to establish, but when you pass away, your family will have thousands of dollars in probate legal expenses to get that will through court, which is required. I hope you found this video helpful. My name is Isaac Shutt. I'm an estate planning and probate attorney who's licensed to practice law both in Texas and in Wyoming.